August 1944. Northern France. The road trembles long before it can be seen. Dust rises in low clouds over hedgerows and shattered villages, drifting across fields that only weeks earlier had been battlefields. Then the sound arrives. Engines, thousands of them, layered and continuous, moving east without pause. Headlights glow faintly through the dusk, masked and hooded, stretching into the distance like an unbroken chain. Trucks roll forward bumper to bumper, loaded with fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, and promise. The Red Ball Express has reached the front. This moment matters because the war in Western Europe is no longer being decided solely by guns or courage. It is being decided by distance, tonnage, and time. After the Normandy landings, Allied armies have broken out of the beachhead faster than even their own planners expected. German forces retreat, regroup, and resist. But the pace of the Allied advance creates a new and dangerous problem. Armies cannot move faster than their supplies. Victory now depends on whether the United States can feed, fuel, and arm a force moving deeper into a shattered continent. Before the summer of 1944, German commanders believed that Allied logistics would be the limiting factor. They expected the invaders to stall once ports were damaged and rail lines destroyed. They assumed that fuel shortages, congestion, and organizational chaos would slow the advance to a crawl. This belief was grounded in history. European armies had always been constrained by supply. Distance had always favored the defender. What they did not anticipate was the scale and flexibility of American logistics once fully unleashed. The Red Ball Express is not a single road or unit, but an emergency system created almost overnight. When ports like Cherbourg prove insufficient and rail networks remain crippled by bombing, the US Army responds not by slowing the advance, but by building a moving artery. Nearly 6,000 trucks are assigned to run day and night, operating on dedicated routes marked by red circles. Traffic flows in one direction only. Speed is prioritized over safety. Maintenance is improvised. The goal is simple: keep the front moving. German soldiers encounter the result before they understand it. They expect Allied units to pause, to consolidate, to wait. Instead, American forces continue pressing forward. Tanks that should be immobilized by fuel shortages keep advancing. Artillery never seems to run out of ammunition. Infantry units remain fed and equipped despite the distance from the beaches. The emotional contrast is stark. German troops are retreating on foot, short of fuel, short of food, short of certainty. Supply depots are lost faster than they can be evacuated. Vehicles are abandoned for lack of gasoline. Orders arrive too late or not at all. Meanwhile, American columns appear endlessly supported, their momentum uninterrupted. The evidence is measurable. During its peak operation, the Red Ball Express delivers more than 12,000 tons of supplies per day to the front. Fuel becomes the most critical cargo. Entire divisions depend on a constant flow of gasoline to maintain operational tempo. The trucks deliver it in bulk, in cans, in drums, whatever can move fastest. Food becomes the recurring symbol of this system. American rations follow the advance relentlessly. Canned meat, bread, coffee, and sugar arrive in quantities that turn sustenance into reassurance. Soldiers eat regularly, predictably. Even under fire, the supply chain holds. For German troops surviving on reduced rations, this abundance is more than physical, it is psychological. German command begins to recognize the shift, but too late. Their doctrine assumes that logistics constrain maneuver. The American system reverses the equation. Logistics enable maneuver. The front does not wait for supply. Supply chases the front and catches it. This realization alters perception at every level. Tactical success against American units no longer yields strategic relief. A destroyed convoy is replaced. A blown bridge is bypassed. The road network becomes elastic, absorbing damage and restoring flow. The Red Ball Express is inefficient by peacetime standards. Trucks break down, drivers are exhausted, but it succeeds because it is relentless. By September 1944, German forces face a new kind of enemy. Not just soldiers and tanks, but an infrastructure that refuses to collapse. The sound of engines on distant roads becomes a constant reminder that the Americans are not slowing down. Every mile gained by the Allies deepens the imbalance. The transformation is ideological as much as operational. German confidence in the limits of democratic warfare erodes. The assumption that only authoritarian control can sustain total war collapses under the weight of moving tonnage. American democracy, decentralized and improvised, proves capable of generating momentum even in chaos. The Red Ball Express does not win battles by itself, it makes battles possible. But it turns opportunity into inevitability. As long as the trucks keep moving, the advance continues. And as summer turns toward autumn, the roads remain crowded, the engines continue their steady roar, and German resistance begins to feel less like defense and more like delay. The convoys do not stop when night falls. Darkness only changes the rhythm. Headlights are hooded, reduced to narrow slits of light that barely touch the road ahead. Drivers lean forward, eyes straining, hands numb from hours on the wheel. The engines continue their low, constant growl, echoing through forests and ruined towns. The Red Ball Express becomes a nocturnal presence, a moving river of steel and fuel that refuses to sleep. This continuity reshapes the campaign. In previous wars, night slowed armies. In 1944, night becomes an extension of daylight. Supplies move while soldiers rest. Fuel arrives before dawn. Ammunition stacks grow silently in fields and churchyards. By morning, American units are ready to move again. German forces expect pauses. They prepare defenses assuming the Allies must halt to reorganize. Instead, pressure resumes almost immediately. What appears at first as reckless speed reveals itself as calculated confidence. The American command understands that momentum itself has become a weapon. Every hour gained widens the logistical gap. The contrast deepens as September advances. German supply lines, already strained, collapse under constant disruption. Rail lines are shattered, bridges are destroyed or captured. Fuel shortages become chronic. Units receive orders they cannot execute because vehicles cannot move. Horses replace trucks. Soldiers march where armor should advance. Food shortages worsen. Rations shrink. Improvisation becomes routine. German soldiers scavenge fields and abandoned villages. The expectation of a disciplined, methodical defense gives way to exhaustion and resignation. The American soldier, by comparison, eats regularly. Field kitchens appear behind advancing units, serving hot meals even as the front shifts. Food is no longer just nourishment. It is proof that the system works. Historical records capture the scale of the effort. The US to Entfarfisch und Poltermauter, or Mauter. Army commits tens of thousands of drivers, many of them African-American soldiers assigned to transportation units. They operate under extreme conditions, often with minimal rest, keeping trucks running far beyond their intended limits. Maintenance crews cannibalize parts. Tires wear down to threads. Engines overheat and are coaxed forward anyway. Efficiency is sacrificed for continuity. German intelligence observes the flow but struggles to counter it. Air attacks against convoys achieve limited success. The sheer number of vehicles makes disruption temporary. Destroyed trucks are replaced. Routes shift. The stream continues. This reality forces a shift in German perception. The belief that Allied advances can be checked by supply failure fades. The war has entered a phase where American logistics dictate tempo. Battles are fought where the Americans choose to fight them. Withdrawal becomes the default German response. Not because resistance is impossible, but because sustaining it is. By the time Allied forces approach the German border, the Red Ball Express has become both a solution and a symbol. It demonstrates that industrial power does not end at the factory gate. It extends forward, mile by mile, adapting to destruction and distance. The sound of engines on the road becomes synonymous with inevitability. The transformation reaches its psychological conclusion. An Falfen funniert soon 44 but one out wake but you prisoners defeats, with soon facultates a tassive toll. German soldiers no longer measure American strength by units encountered, but by the supplies behind them. Every convoy suggests that tomorrow will look much like today. More fuel, more ammunition, more pressure. Hope shifts from victory to survival. As autumn rains begin to fall, turning roads to mud, the convoys slow but do not stop. Detours lengthen routes. Loads shift. Drivers push on. The system bends without breaking. The Red Ball Express is eventually phased out as ports reopen and rail lines are restored, but its impact remains. It has carried the Allied advance through its most vulnerable phase, bridging the gap between ambition and reality. What follows is not sudden collapse, but steady erosion. German resistance continues, but the outcome is no longer in doubt. Logistics has done what firepower alone could not. It has removed time from the defender and given it to the attacker. The roads grow quieter as winter approaches, but the lesson endures. Modern war is not only about destroying the enemy, it is about sustaining oneself longer than the enemy can endure. Autumn settles over Western Europe with cold rain and lengthening shadows. Roads that carried the Red Ball Express at full speed now turn slick and uneven, rutted by thousands of tires. Mud clings to boots and wheels alike. The advance slows, but it does not stop. Supplies still arrive, fuel still flows. Ammunition still stacks up behind the front. The sound of engines remains, muted by weather but unbroken. German forces feel the difference immediately. Their retreat has stripped them of prepared depots and organized transport. Fuel shortages are no longer temporary setbacks but permanent conditions. Vehicles are abandoned not because they are damaged, but because they cannot be fed. Artillery units ration shells. Tank crews wait for orders that never come because movement itself has become impossible. American units adapt to the changing conditions with the same logistical flexibility that carried them across France. Engineers repair bridges under fire. Roads are reinforced with crushed stone and timber. When routes fail, new ones are created. The system adjusts continuously, absorbing friction rather than collapsing under it. Food continues to arrive with the same reliability. Field kitchens appear wherever units pause. Hot meals are served in rain-soaked fields and ruined farmyards. Coffee is distributed in steaming containers that cut through the damp air. For American soldiers, this regularity reinforces morale and discipline. For German observers, it underscores disparity. An army that eats regularly expects to fight tomorrow. Historical reports from late 1944 show the cumulative effect of this imbalance. German operational plans increasingly account for supply failure rather than enemy action. Orders emphasize withdrawal, conservation, and delay. The idea of restoring initiative fades. Logistics has stripped the defender of choice. The Red Ball Express itself becomes less visible as rail lines reopen and ports come back into service, but its influence remains embedded in Allied operations. The lessons learned, speed over perfection, redundancy over efficiency, improvisation over rigidity, shape the final phase of the campaign. Supplies are no longer an afterthought. They are the foundation. German ideology, built on assumptions of control and discipline, confronts its limits. Centralized authority cannot conjure fuel or food from scarcity. The belief that willpower can replace material reality collapses under daily experience. Soldiers and officers alike understand that they are fighting an enemy whose strength does not diminish with distance or time. As winter approaches, the soundscape of the war changes again. Engines labor in cold air. Snow muffles movement. Yet even now, the supply chain holds. The American system, strained but intact, continues to function. This continuity erodes resistance more effectively than any single battle. Each day the Germans cannot regroup is a day lost forever. Each mile the Allies hold becomes permanent. The front solidifies not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through sustained pressure. The Red Ball Express has already done its work. It has ensured that opportunity became outcome. It has demonstrated that in modern war, logistics is not merely support, it is power. The roads that once shook under endless convoys now bear fewer trucks. But the memory of their passage remains etched into the campaign. They carried more than supplies. They carried certainty. And as the war moves toward its final winter, that certainty weighs heavily on those who can no longer escape it. Winter arrives suddenly in December 1944, tightening its grip on forests and roads alike. Snow blankets the Ardennes, muting sound and movement, turning familiar routes into narrow corridors of ice and shadow. For a brief moment, German commanders believe the weather itself may succeed where strategy has failed. The offensive they launch is built on surprise, speed, and the hope that Allied logistics, stretched and exposed, will finally break. German soldiers move forward expecting chaos behind the American lines. They believe fuel dumps will be sparse, convoys disorganized, supply routes fragile. They count on shortages to paralyze the enemy. For them, the offensive is not just a military gamble, but a logistical one. If American supply collapses, momentum might return. What they encounter instead is resilience. The attack disrupts the front, but it does not sever the system behind it. Fuel depots are dispersed rather than centralized. Supply routes reroute around threatened areas. Convoys slow, detour, and continue. Even in snow and darkness, American logistics adapts. Trucks grind forward through forests and villages, engines laboring, tires chained, drivers pushing on despite exhaustion. Food again becomes the measure of endurance. American soldiers in frozen foxholes receive hot meals whenever conditions allow. Coffee circulates in insulated containers. Bread and rations arrive with regularity. These deliveries are not luxuries. They are signals. The system still works. German troops advancing through captured territory discover supplies they cannot exploit. Fuel they seize is often incompatible or insufficient. Time works against them. Each day the offensive continues. Their own shortages deepen. Vehicles run dry. Columns stall. The hope of outrunning American logistics fades. Historical records show that even during the height of the Ardennes fighting, the U.S. Army maintains the flow of essential supplies. Losses occur, but they are absorbed. Replacement equipment arrives. Units refit and return to the line. The Red Ball Express no longer operates as it once did, but its principles endure throughout the logistical network. The emotional contrast sharpens. German soldiers fight with urgency, born of necessity, knowing the window is closing. American forces fight with confidence that tomorrow will bring what today consumes. This difference shapes outcomes more than weather or terrain. As the offensive falters, German perception shifts irrevocably. The belief that American logistics could be disrupted into failure proves false. The system bends but does not break. Momentum swings back decisively. By January 1945, the roads once again fill with Allied movement, this time eastward. Snow melts into slush under advancing tracks. Supplies follow close behind. The last German reserves are spent, not in a single catastrophic defeat, but in the slow realization that material imbalance cannot be overcome. The transformation is complete. German ideology, which prized control and discipline above all else, confronts its own limits. Willpower cannot replace fuel. Courage cannot replace food. Command cannot replace capacity. The American logistical system, decentralized, improvised, abundant, has proven capable of sustaining war across oceans, continents, and seasons. It has turned distance into advantage and time into a weapon. As winter loosens its grip and the Allies prepare for the final push into Germany, the roads tell the story. They carry the marks of countless convoys, the scars of constant movement. They have become witnesses to a truth the war has made unavoidable. In modern war, victory belongs not only to those who fight well, but to those who can continue fighting when others cannot. Early 1945, the Rhine looms ahead, wide and cold, flowing through a Germany already exhausted by years of war. Its bridges lie shattered or heavily defended, symbols of a final barrier that once seemed insurmountable. Yet behind the Allied front, preparation unfolds with quiet confidence. Supplies accumulate in vast quantities. Fuel depots swell. Ammunition stacks grow higher each day. The machinery of movement hums steadily, indifferent to geography or symbolism. German soldiers defending the river expect the crossing to strain Allied resources. They assume the logistical burden will slow the advance, that bridging operations will outpace supply capacity. In earlier wars, such obstacles had bought time. Now time is precisely what Germany no longer has. American engineers move forward with materials already waiting. Pontoon bridges are assembled with practiced efficiency. Trucks queue in disciplined lines, ready to cross the moment spans are secured. The sound of engines once again defines the moment, not sudden or dramatic, but continuous, patient, inevitable. Food continues to arrive with the same regularity that has marked the campaign since France. Field kitchens operate close to the front. Hot meals circulate even as artillery echoes across the riverbanks. For the soldiers, this routine reinforces a sense of permanence. They are not racing against collapse. They are advancing within a system that expects success. German units, by contrast, face acute shortages. Civilian infrastructure has collapsed. Military supply is sporadic. Fuel is nearly non-existent. Ammunition is rationed. Soldiers fight knowing that retreat offers no relief and resistance offers no solution. The emotional weight of inevitability settles heavily. The Rhine crossings succeed not because of surprise, but because of preparation sustained by logistics. Once across, Allied forces fan out rapidly. Towns fall in succession. Resistance becomes localized and fragmented. The German army no longer fights as a coordinated force, but as isolated groups delaying the unavoidable. Historical accounts emphasize how quickly the advance resumes once the river is crossed. The logistical apparatus that once relied on emergency measures now operates with renewed stability. Rail lines are restored behind the front. Ports operate efficiently. The improvisation of the Red Ball Express era has matured into a fully integrated supply system. Food once again illustrates the disparity. American soldiers move through German towns where civilians struggle with scarcity. Rations remain consistent for the advancing troops. The contrast is visible and unsettling. It underscores the broader truth of the war's outcome. Abundance has defeated exhaustion. German ideology, built on the promise of control and sacrifice, finds no answer to this reality. Years of total war have drained resources beyond recovery. The belief that endurance alone could compensate for material limits collapses entirely. As Allied forces push deeper into Germany, the war's end approaches not with sudden collapse, but with steady pressure. Logistics has stripped the defender of options. Every mile gained by the Allies is irreversible. Every delay only postpones the same conclusion. The sound of engines follows the advance to the very end. Trucks roll through cities reduced to rubble. Supply columns stretch along roads that now lead not to new fronts, but to occupation and surrender. The Red Ball Express itself belongs to the past by this stage, but its legacy defines the victory. It proved that speed could be sustained, that chaos could be organized, and that democracy could mobilize abundance without losing coherence. As the guns fall silent, the roads remain. They bear the marks of countless tires and endless movement. They tell a story not just of battles won, but of systems that endured. In the end, Germany was not overwhelmed solely by firepower. It was overwhelmed by continuity, by an enemy that could move, feed, and supply itself without pause, by a logistical force that turned distance into advantage and time into defeat. That is the quiet lesson left behind by the convoys. Freedom, when organized, does not merely resist, it advances. Spring 1945 arrives quietly, almost cautiously, as if uncertain whether the war has truly ended. The roads of Germany, once choked with retreating columns and advancing convoys, begin to empty. Trucks still move, but now their loads change. Ammunition gives way to occupation supplies. Fuel feeds reconstruction as much as pursuit. The sound of engines remains, but it no longer carries urgency. It carries conclusion. German resistance collapses, not in a single moment, but through a series of acknowledgements. Units surrender when orders no longer arrive. Soldiers lay down weapons when food and fuel are gone. Civilians watch as columns pass through towns that no longer have the means to resist or recover. The war's final days reveal no dramatic reversal, only exhaustion meeting inevitability. The logistical imbalance that defined the campaign has reached its final expression. American forces remain fed, supplied, and mobile to the very end. Even as fighting ceases, systems continue to function. Warehouses operate, kitchens serve meals, fuel flows. The infrastructure of references war transitions seamlessly into the infrastructure of occupation. Food, the quiet symbol that followed the advance from Normandy onward, takes on its final meaning. American soldiers eat regularly, even as German civilians struggle with scarcity. The contrast is not celebrated, but it is unmistakable. It reflects not cruelty, but capacity. One system endured. The other was consumed by its own limits. Historians looking back would identify this outcome as inevitable only in hindsight. At the time, it was the result of countless decisions made far from the front, decisions about production, transport, redundancy, and flexibility. The Red Ball Express was only the most visible manifestation of a deeper truth. American logistics did not simply support combat operations. They defined what was possible. German soldiers had once expected that distance, destruction, and chaos would restrain the Allies. Instead, those forces exposed the strength of a system built to absorb strain. The expectation of collapse met the reality of continuity. Ideology met arithmetic. Control met capacity. The transformation this produced was profound. It reshaped how modern war would be understood. Long after 1945, victory no longer belonged solely to those who planned best or fought hardest. It belonged to those who could continue when continuation itself became the battlefield. The roads that carried the Red Ball Express and its successors remain, worn and scarred, stretching across a continent rebuilt atop their foundations. They remind history that power does not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it arrives with the steady hum of engines, the predictable delivery of food, and the quiet assurance that tomorrow's needs will be met. In that assurance lay the defeat of Nazi Germany, not merely in fire or steel, but in the relentless advance of a system that could sustain freedom through abundance, organization, and endurance. That is the legacy of American logistics in the final year of the war. It did not seek glory. It did not pause for recognition. It simply moved forward, mile by mile, until resistance could no longer keep pace. And when the movement finally stopped, the war was already over. References Richard Overy, Why the Allies Won, Chapter, Industrial Warfare. Martin van Creveld, Supplying War, Logistics from Wallenstein to Patton, U.S. Army Center of Military History. The Red Ball Express, U.S. Army Transportation Corps, Historical Records. 1944-1945, Stephen E. Ambrose, Citizen Soldiers, Chester Wilmot. The Struggle for Europe. The Struggle for Europe,